Introduction to Beekeeping, and our presenter is Austin Quinlan, a fifth-year film and animation student at RIT and president and founder of the RIT Beekeepers Club. Austin has been a very active student on and off campus, and he's been involved with environmental teams and organizations for several years. But it wasn't until he joined the environmental wellness team through student wellness at RIT that he became interested in beekeeping. Fast forward 2 years, and Austin took the initiative to turn his interest into a club. The RIT Beekeepers Club was born. With overwhelming support, the club quickly grew in size, and the team has been able to get 3 beehives on RIT's campus in May of this year. Now, with over 300 club members, this group is trying as hard as ever to expand their development efforts and increase education to campuses here as well as across the state. Welcome, Austin. Let's get started.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Lydia said, my name is Austin, and I am a fifth-year film and animation student, as well as the president and founder of the RIT Beekeepers Club. So a little bit of our history. We were technically formed in November of 2015, so just about a year ago today, actually. And then after that, we officially began having meetings in February where we hit 150 members. Our first info session had like 60 people in it, which was really unexpected because we really thought there would only be about 10 students, but we had 40 students, 8 faculty and staff, and then about 12 other people that aren't even affiliated with RIT, and I don't know how they became familiar with it. After that, we received permission for the hives in May. As you can see, there's a pretty big gap between February of 2016 and May of 2016. This 3-month period was the end of the 3 years that I and others have spent trying to get beehives on campus. So it was a very long battle that has taken most of my RIT career. But eventually we did get permission handed down to us from Dr. Dessler as well as Dr. Sandy Johnson, and we were able to get our hives implemented right next to the community garden and the new Policini Center. So on May 20th, we received 3 hive boxes as well as 2 colonies. One of the hive boxes was donated and 2 of them were purchased new. And then the 2 colonies were donated from a member of ours whose family has been beekeepers for 15 years, I think she said, at this point 16. Following that, May 20th was actually graduation, so it was a very hectic day, and it made a lot of people nervous because, you know, we had thousands of extra people on campus from families coming to watch their students graduate, and then we were also receiving a truckload of bees. So many people were kind of afraid of that. A couple days later, I was sitting at home and got a frantic call, multiple calls from a member of ours, public safety, and a bunch of other students and faculty and staff saying that there was a swarm of bees on campus and that I had to go deal with it because they were our bees. So I, quick got ready, drove to campus, and found the swarm, which was right in Global Village, sitting on a low shrub. And I put them in our empty hive box, and then I was like, all right, we caught it, we alleviated the problem, but that's probably the end of the Beekeepers Club. 3 days was a great run, all good. Then I went over to our bees, and I found that it wasn't one of our 2 colonies. It was just a coincidental 3rd colony that happened to swarm at RIT. So that filled our 3rd box, which was very convenient because then it meant we didn't have to buy bees or get them donated because we found some local Rochester bees. So we caught the feral swarm May 23rd in Global Village, and I'll talk about that hive as we look at a photo of them. And since it was at graduation, it was right at the end of the school year, so then summer was just maintaining the hives and looking at them. But at the start of this semester, we hit 300 members, which was really unexpected. Again, I thought this would be a small club. I thought it was going to be me and like 5 other people. So to have 300 email members, 50 active members, faculty, staff, students, alumni, and then even people who aren't affiliated with RIT, that was just a shock to me. So if you look at the photo on the right, that is one of our bees that is our Italian hive. The white hive is Italian. So that little female bee right there is collecting pollen. This was taken last week. So they're still out there collecting pollen, which is nice. Some of the impact of our club. Last year, we started volunteering weekly at the Scottsville Animal Shelter. So a group of us would go in collaboration with the former RIT Leadership Institute. Now it's known as the Center for Leadership and Civic Engagement. We kind of partnered with them because at the time I was president of that as well. And we ran a volunteering session there where we would go, and it's simple. You just play with the animals, which is really fun. It's probably the easiest volunteering you could ever do. But it was very beneficial, and a lot of the animals we played with, we would also advertise through Facebook and everything. And a lot of them actually got adopted. One of them, someone from RIT adopted a dog that I absolutely fell in love with. His name was Rex, and he's a big Shiba Inu Akita mix. So we actually saw some great impact from volunteering and playing with them. Additionally, we collaborated with SEAL, the Student Environmental Action League, for a bunch of events that they had. We had an Earth Day seed planting event where we were out by the Kodak Quad, and students would come up, plant some seeds, and then we would germinate them, and those would be donated to community gardens, both on campus and around Rochester and Monroe County. Additionally, for the community garden here, we built some wooden raised beds for things like strawberries or squash, plenty of other plants that were maintained. We also had a plot in the community garden. I'm ashamed to say that our plot was probably the worst, mostly because I chose plants for it that did not do well in the drought. A lot of other plants were much hardier, and then ours just didn't look great. But we had pollinator-friendly plants. So we had lavender, we had bee balm, flowering vegetables like tomatoes and things like that. We had some pansies, mums later on catnip. So things that were very beneficial to the bees that we had. The drought kind of threw a wrench into our plans. We've also helped to educate the RIT campus about the importance of honeybees. One of the biggest things I get when people find out that I have bees, people always say, oh, I don't like bees, I hate them, they're horrible, and I don't want any of them. And I usually ask the question, well, do you not like bees or do you not like wasps? And they say, what's the difference? So then I go into my long-winded explanation about the difference between all of the different genuses of bees and the genuses of wasps and hornets. But usually at the end they go, oh, okay, honeybees are the good ones, wasps are the bad ones. And so helping to educate a lot of people has been very important because a lot of people are just ready to get rid of them, get rid of bees the first time they see them without knowing that they're not harmful, they're docile, they're pretty calm, they won't really sting you, and that they're very, very beneficial for the environment. Finally, I participated in the New York Bee Wellness Workshops in Ithaca under Pat Bono. She runs a grassroots organization, New York Bee Wellness. And so that was a 3-day event at the DICE Labs, which is Cornell's honeybee research lab. And there I was able to hear great speakers from Michigan and California. One of them was Randy Oliver, who is the country's top bee researcher. And so it was really incredible to hear him speak all about the research he's done and about his work. We've also helped some local schools in their efforts to start beekeeping. I've met with students from Syracuse University because they're looking to get some hives. I met with some teachers at Brockport High School, Geneseo, and then I just got a request yesterday from a student at University of Buffalo, and he wants to start an apiary at UB, so he was kind of seeing how we did it. I have a lot to share with him because it was quite a process, and I'll get to that in a moment. Some of our current and upcoming projects, we are currently designing pollinator gardens for campus, so we're working with Auxiliary Services and Kurt Ingrick to redesign, actually the one right there, the rooftop garden on Salsaritas, as well as 2 other gardens that we can put wherever we want. We've been monitoring the health and safety of our hives all summer and throughout the semester. Some of our upcoming projects, we want to implement more hives. We currently have 3, but I would love to see us get upwards of 10, as well as a rooftop hive for the Golisano Institute for Sustainability. There's a big butterfly garden up there and pollinator garden, which would be a great place to have bees because rooftop hives and urban beekeeping, it's all the rage right now, which is pretty fun. Additionally, next semester we're going to be creating a comprehensive guide on beekeeping as well as how to actually build a hive. a lot of the requests or people that have come to me have said, well, I don't really want to spend money on a new hive, but I have a lot of tools and I have all of the wood myself. How can I build it? And you can actually build your own from scratch. It's pretty simple. You just need to know how to do it. And in all of my research, I have not found a guide on how to do it. So we are going to be creating one, and that will be sent out to a lot of the local schools. So if they want to try to start that, they can. A lot of local clubs so that they can do the same and things like that. Another thing we've been doing is running our crowdfunding campaign. So our crowdfunding campaign, is through USeed and RIT, and right there, yeah. So it's called Save the Bees with the RIT Beekeepers. This presentation will be sent out to you later in PowerPoint or PDF form, so you will have access to this link. But it's just detailing some of the things that we want to do: increase pollinator gardens, get a space for research so we can commit ourselves to honeybee research, get more hives on campus, create a native bee hotel, things like that, all of which are not just important to me as a founder of the club, but they're really imperative to the sustainability of RIT and, I mean, the country in general. Most people overlook native bee species when it comes to pollination, but mason bees actually pollinate 5 times as many plants as honeybees do, which is pretty incredible because a honeybee can pollinate 300 flowers in one day, so a mason bee will pollinate up to 1,500. The only reason we cultivate more from honeybees is because they produce excess honey that we can take. But, you know, that's a complete species that is basically forgotten about when it comes to pollination. So we want to increase education about that, increase the pollinator gardens so that our bees won't have to go to areas like local farmland that's treated with pesticides and neonicotinoids. We can instead keep them closer to campus where we can guarantee they are much safer. We are also interested in getting the flow hive, which is a new type of beehive honey super, a box, which I'll get to, where you can gather all the honey without fully disturbing or going into the hive. If you haven't seen it, I would look it up. It's really incredible. It's called the flow hive. And they're a little controversial in the beekeeping community. I don't really know why it's controversial. It doesn't really make sense to me. Because to me, I think any hive that is doing well enough to have excess honey is a good hive, because that means your bees are strong enough to, you know, survive the winter. They're creating a fair amount of honey. The queen is healthy enough to be laying new eggs and new baby bees. So to me, it's a win-win. You get extra honey and you get to increase the bee population. We've had a lot of recognition, thankfully, last semester, and I think part of it is mostly just because there aren't many beekeeping clubs around. You know, there's a few in the state. There's New York Bee Wellness, Rochester Beekeepers. You know, every county has one. Well, not really. A lot of counties have them, but not a lot of schools do. So we had an article in the Democrat and Chronicle. I was very thankful to be on the front page of one paper. We had an RIT Club Center spotlight. We were in the University News twice. If you want to see how inarticulate I am, watch the second one, the University News, not in 30 seconds. But with that video, you can also see us go directly into the hives. So it was a really incredible experience to be able to spread this knowledge throughout Rochester with such a big newspaper and out to alumni. Right after the Democrat and Chronicle article was posted and distributed, I received a huge influx of notifications from people who suddenly thought I was the bee expert. And at the time, I had only been a beekeeper for a week, so it was kind of nerve-wracking. The article talked about how I caught a swarm on campus. So all of a sudden, people were like, hi, I have 60,000 bees in my ceiling. Can you come get them? I have, you know, 40,000 bees in the wall of my sister's home. Can you get it so we don't have to demolish it? And I didn't know anything. Catching the bees, for me, was one of the easiest things I've done because they just happened to be, like, close to the ground and out in the open. But all of these people were asking me to destroy their, like, parlor ceilings so that I could go in and get the bees, not realizing that I had only been doing this for a week. So thankfully, I took all of those people and I passed them off to much more experienced beekeepers for pest removers who knew how to safely do it. But it was interesting to get a sudden uproar of people interested in what I was doing. In this photo, that's me in the beekeeping suit. This was on the day of the interview, and I'm going into our purple hive, which is, that is our, oh, is that our feral hive? That's our feral hive. So our feral hive is the one we cut on campus. They were very angry when I went in, and I got stung right in the ankle, despite the fact that I'm fully covered and suited, even my feet. They stung through my socks, which was a problem. So next I'll talk a little bit about honeybee anatomy as well as hive anatomy. That way you can leave this with some semblance of bee recognition, and if you see a wild hive, you can recognize what's a beehive as opposed to something else like a wasp hive. And so to start with honeybee anatomy, they have the hypopharyngeal gland, which is what actually creates the protein that is used in the wax and the comb. And that's up in the head, along with their 5 eyes. I didn't know bees had 5 eyes when I started. I just assumed they had the 2 compound eyes. But it turns out they have the 2 big compound eyes, which see UV light, green, blue, and yellow. Technically, they see blue and yellow, but when you mix that, you get green. So they also see green. They also have 3 smaller eyes on the top of their head, and those see lights and darks. So those are really photosensitivity as opposed to color. And that's important because that's how they detect threats. So the 2 big compound eyes are how they detect, flowers and things for pollination. It's how they sense each other. And then the light and dark eyes are for things like bears or incoming threats into the hives. When we open the hive, that's how they see us, is with those eyes on the top of their head. Their proboscis is their long tongue, which is, if you see a bee like eating up close, it's kind of weird, but they stick out their long tongue, and that's how they get honey and everything, and they'll feed the royal jelly to the babies. Their honey stomach is in their abdomen. Their whole back end is the honey stomach, and it carries a fair amount of honey, 75 milligrams. When you see a bee gorge itself on honey, you can actually watch their abdomen fully expand, and it basically becomes like a clear yellow. And it's really interesting to see because it's opaque when they're empty, and then their abdomen is like twice the size. So it's really interesting to see just because it's not something I expected. So how do bees build their hives? Beeswax is what they use to build their iconic hexagonal comb shape. And the beeswax is actually just a byproduct of the honey consumption. The sugars from the honey are then mixed with the protein from their hypopharyngeal gland, and it's turned into the wax, which they then deposit. They do have 2 types of wax. They have the propolis and the honeycomb wax. The propolis is much, much stronger. So that's called bee glue, and it's more made from plant-resident bee saliva as well as beeswax, so it's kind of a mixture of other things. But that's how you see the hive. If you ever see a wild hive hanging from a tree, which is very typical for things like the African, I don't like to say African killer bees because that makes people nervous. The African wild bees, a lot of their hives hang directly from branches. Honeycomb, it's so thin and it's just wax, so it's pretty weak, but the propolis is very strong, and that's how it holds up everything. The honeycomb is used for pollen storage and larvae. As you can see in the photo, this is an entire frame that's getting filled with honey. So this photo was taken mid-October, and then at the end of October we went back in, and this frame was 100% filled with honey. It's probably got 10 to 15 pounds of honey stored in it with the white caps, which is really interesting because we were trying to lift it and we were like, oh, it's stuck, it's so heavy, and the propolis is stuck to the other frames. But it turns out it was just so heavy because it was absolutely filled with honey. So as I was saying with the different hive structures, the one on the right is a natural hive, and that one is for the African wild bees. The light colored part at the top, that is really the propolis. That is how it's sticking to the tree and not just breaking off. So the rest of it is honeycomb, and that's going to be filled with honey, bee larvae, royal jelly, bee pollen or bee bread, everything like that. The hive on the left is a commercial hive, and that is what you will most typically see for beekeepers. So it's called the Langstroth hive, and it's composed of a bottom board, which is the small screened section on the very base of it, a deep brood box, which actually makes up the 2 boxes in the middle. A medium or honey super is that top box. That one, you usually put a queen excluder, which is next, in between the medium super and the second brood box in order to make sure that that top section is just for honey. If you really need to expand and get more baby bees, you will leave that queen excluder off, and she will, maybe go up there and lay some new bees. But for the most part, that one's just for honey production. That way you can take that top box off, not interfere with any bee breeding, and you can keep all that honey for yourself. There's also the inner cover and outer cover. Those are important because they just keep the bees in and keep everything else out. And then the frames, which I don't have a photo of here, but you just saw on the last slide, which is internal. The frames, you can have, they have empty box frames, which are just the wooden outer edge. You can have plastic inlay frames, which is what we can see in this last one. This is a plastic frame. It gives them a base to work off of. So it's just, plastic hexagons, and they just build them out. It means that they expend a lot less energy, which is really nice, and they can focus more on creating healthier bees and creating more honey. You can also have a wax frame, which functions the same. It's just less sturdy and more likely to break. Now I'll get into types of comb, and I have photos for all of these. When I started beekeeping, I looked at all of the comb and thought it was all the same. And so it wasn't until I went to the Dice Lab in Ithaca that I learned more about which was which. So honeycomb is typically white or light yellow. That's what we just saw, which was my white-capped honeycomb. That's filled, if a frame is filled with it, it can get anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds, which is really nice. Worker comb is standard, makes up a majority of the comb. It's usually yellow to brown, and that's where all of the new baby bees are raised, as well as bee pollen is put in there. Bee pollen is just a mixture of saliva and pollen. Drone comb is for the new drones. It's a little larger, and it kind of, people have described it as corn pop cereal, and you'll see that in a second. Drones are the male bees. There aren't very many, and you will rarely see them in a hive, but they're a little bit larger than the workers and still smaller than the queen. The queen cups, there's actually 3 types, and they aren't needed until, or they aren't used until they are absolutely needed, There's swarm cells, supersedure cells, and emergency queen cells. So right here on this slide, we see a lot of empty honeycomb. This middle section is all brood. That's all for the female bees. So, those are nurse bees and foragers. One of them could be a new queen, but we wouldn't find out yet until later in the season. The comb on the left that seems like it's sticking out more, that is drone comb. So as you can see, it kind of looks like corn pop cereal. It's built that way. The cap is larger because the drones are just larger in size. Then here we have the 3 queen cells. So there's swarm cells, and this photo is actually, it's not correct. It should be facing down. But that long white cell is a queen cell. It means there's a baby queen in there. Ooh, a baby queen is about the size of a regular female bee. But that's when the swarm is, or the colony is overcrowded, and they need to be ready to split. So that queen will hatch out of the comb, leave the hive, and half the hive will go with her. The next one is supersedure, and that is when they know the queen is sick or dying, or she's old. If they know she is on her way out, they will create a new queen out of an existing female bee and just have her ready just in case. Then if that queen hatches too early, they will kill one of them. It's kind of a little barbaric, but they do what they have to. The third one is the emergency queen cell. And while this is just a drawing, you can see those were 2 female bees that were, just ready to be nurse bees, and they were in there, but the queen probably died, so they had to just pick a bee and say, all right, this bee is going to become the next queen bee, and they continue feeding it royal jelly so it becomes fertile. Its sexual organs get much larger, and as you can see, it kind of grows like up and bent. We have seen a lot of supersedure cells and swarm cells in our hives. Thankfully, we haven't had any swarms, but we did have a supersedure. there was a queen in our white hive, which was our Italian hive, and the bees could sense that that queen was not doing well. I'm not sure if she was diseased or just old, but she was definitely not up to snuff, so they created a new queen and just let that queen die off. And now the hive is doing much better. Bee parasites and diseases are really important to know if you're going to get into beekeeping. This was something that I didn't really pay attention to when I started. I always thought that once I had the bees on campus, I was like, great, my job is done, I'm now a beekeeper. It wasn't until I learned about all of these other things that I was like, oh, I was just a bee haver. I owned bees, I did not take care of them. And Randy Oliver, the researcher that I was talking about earlier, he kind of equated it to, if you let a stray animal in your house, you can't really say like, oh, I have this very healthy, animal now. If that dog has mange or if that cat has fleas or something, you're not really doing anything to take care of it. You have a cat because that cat now lives with you, but you aren't really a responsible pet owner. So it's similar with the bees, I had the bees, but I wasn't doing anything to take care of them. I wasn't monitoring their health. I was just letting them be. Well, for lack of a better term, I was letting them be. And so now that I know about all of the diseases and parasites, every time I go into the hive, that's what I look for. So tracheal mites, nosema spores, small hive beetle, there's wax moth, Varroa mites. Chuckbrute is something that thankfully I haven't seen. I haven't seen any of these yet in our hives, which is really, really good, almost unheard of. So thankfully our hive has been very, very healthy. Some viruses are sac brood and deformed wing virus, and the worst one is the bacteria American foul brood. And I'll get to that. It's one of those things that is, it's kind of like what the Black Plague was for us, but for bees. So it's very detrimental, and that is causing so many problems across the country. So for parasites and pests, the top right image shows some tracheal mites. They live in the throats of the bees, so they are obviously very, very small. That is a microscopic image of the tracheal mites, and all of the little circles next to it, the two tracheal mites are the dark ones, the light ones are eggs. I don't really know how it lays an egg that is the same size as its body, so I'm interested to learn how it physically does that. But those cause issues because they will eat the bee's throat from the inside out and kill the bee. Nosema spores are a huge problem because they are prolific. A bee can have anywhere from 1 spore to 1 billion spores, and that's just in a single bee. They live in the intestines and spread through waste. So what you'll see if you have a hive that is infested with spores or infected with them, you'll see a lot of bee dysentery on the outside, which is not a pleasant sight. Small hive beetle is what is at the bottom right. A certain beetle will get in and start infiltrating everything. They eat the comb, they eat the honey, they eat the baby bees for protein, and they grow in such fast numbers that it's hard for the bees to keep them out. If a single beetle got in, that's fine, the bees would usually take care of it. They know when something is a threat to them, and so they will immediately get rid of it. But if a few get in, and they get in undetected, and they start, manifesting themselves, that's when it creates a huge problem. Varroa mites are another huge problem for beekeepers all over the country. I think over 99% of beehives have Varroa mites. Like I said, we haven't seen any in ours. It's likely that we have some, and every hive has some in small amounts. But it's what they can bring along with them that is really the problem. So per 300 bees, it's very typical to have up to 5 or 6 Varroa mites. That is not many, that's typical. But any more, and that means your hive is really in danger of getting sick, of dying, of becoming infected with something else, or of just being taken over. The Varroa mite is a carrier for many other bee diseases, and they're very prolific. They are kind of like fleas. Fleas don't really, they're annoying, and they, if you get bit by one, it's not very pleasant, but it's the diseases that fleas can carry that are really detrimental to us and our pets. And so it's similar to that. Right here you can see the Varroa mite. So on the left is a Varroa mite on a little larva, and on the right there's 1, 2, 3 or 4 on that bee. to give you some perspective, that's kind of like if you had a Frisbee biting onto you, gnawing into you, which is not very fun. And so this bee has 3 of them. So if you had 3 Frisbees on your body that were all alive, crawling around, this bee shows that there's a higher infection rate because this single bee has 3 on it. If you were to, you could have 900 Varroa mites per 300 bees at that rate, which is not very good. The Varroa mites weaken the bees' immune system, and with that, the bees become more susceptible to things like American foul brood, sac brood, Chuckbrute, deformed wing virus, things like that. One of the fungi that is very common, the most prolific fungi, but not the most common infection in the hive, is Chuckbrute. It infects the gut of the larva, and it enters through tainted spores, so it can really be anywhere. There's no great way of knowing where the Chuckbrute came from, but it does very well in hives that are not ventilated. It is a fungus, so it grows in cool, damp, dark places, and so if the hive isn't ventilated, you'll get some more moisture. That'll cause the Chuckbrute to grow and thrive, and this will really weaken a hive's ability to reproduce. These are 3 baby bees and larvae that have succumbed to Chuckbrute, and so all of the royal jelly and the bee pollen that's in there has basically solidified. The viruses that are the 2 most common are Chuckbrute and deformed wing virus. Chuckbrute causes a failure to pupate, and it's indicative through the underdeveloped head. It's white or yellow in color and a jagged edge. So if you look at the top right image, that little thing on that little grub, that's the head of an otherwise full-size pupae. So that the pupae is fully formed, but the head is not, and so therefore that bee is not going to live. The little caps above it, the dark yellow, those are other infected Chuckbrute caps. Deformed wing virus, I don't have to go into too much. It causes wing deformation, as you can see. So the bees can't fly, they can't really do their job or function. It can also affect their limbs, and they usually just die off. Bees are very smart in the sense that if they know that a bee is infected with something, and if it's just like a single bee or a few bees, they will actually go in and eliminate that bee. So if it's a baby and they know it's sick, they will chew out that cap, or that comb, they'll bring it outside and let it die. If it's a fully formed bee, that bee will go and eliminate themselves. They'll fly off from the hive and go die on their own to save the rest of the colony from getting infected. So for bacteria, as I said, American foul brood is the worst one. It spreads very rapidly, and at the moment there's no fix for it. Everything else can, you can recover from, but this one you cannot. It's caused by spores that travel through food, so for them that's pollen. It kills larvae after 3 days, so if you look at that photo, all those little white specks, those are all baby bees that are dead. Each larva can hold up to 100 million spores, So every single comb there, because this is a very, very infected hive, every infected comb probably has around 50 million spores already, and there's literally just small little bee eggs in there that aren't going to grow. As you can see in there, it's got the jagged caps. They're all sunken in. They're really dark and scaly. It's black and brown as opposed to a light yellow. And the odor is what is really indicative of it. It's called foul brood for a reason. The brood smells kind of like gym socks and sweat and rotten, whatever. It's not a pleasant smell. I did experience this in person. I have seen a hive or a frame with this, and however bad you think the smell is, it's much worse in person. It's like you can smell it from like 30 feet away. You can smell it in a closed hive, and so it's really nasty stuff. But the reason it's so bad is it spreads so rapidly. If you have a hive with it, it'll almost immediately, within days, spread to the other hives, and for instance, we have 3. So if one of our hives had it, the other 2 would inevitably get it within days, and then probably within a week or 2, all 3 hives would be completely dead. And so it's very prolific in just how fast it spreads, especially because it kills off an entire generation. And when every single baby bee is not being grown, that's a problem. There is kind of one cure for it. Not really a cure, but there's only one thing you can do if you get it. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this slide. So to see if you have it, you can send a sample of your hive off to a certain lab out in, I think, Ohio. The problem with that is it's so prolific, if it takes 2 weeks to get to you, your hive's going to be dead. So a way you can test it at home is to do the rope test or the milk test. The rope test, you just stick a matchstick in and see if it ropes out. That's because everything is like coagulated and become gross. As opposed, you know, if it runs off, then you're fine. But if it ropes out with the matchstick, then it's AFB. You can also do a milk test with powdered milk or whole milk, and the infection in AFB or in the comb will coagulate the milk and like clump all the proteins together and stop everything from being formed, and that's exactly how it works with bees. So in that photo, that is a kind of a mixed bee. I don't really know how to describe it. That's all the components of the bee, just not formed. So the only way to stop AFB from transferring is you have to set your hives on fire. You can't disinfect them. You can't, you know, just put some antibacterial stuff in it. You have to completely burn them, and sometimes all of them. Like these other hives are in the back are just being, if they're not in quarantine and they're waiting to be burned, farmers and apiaries will have to burn, you know, hundreds of hives if they find it. And you also have to warn every beekeeper within like 5 to 10 miles of you, because that's how far a bee can spread. So if 2 bees from hives that are 10 miles apart happen to meet at the same flower, that flower is now affected, those bees are infected, and they bring it back to the rest of the colony. You basically have to go on lockdown. It's pretty serious stuff. And you can't just burn them yourself. You have to have a registered professional come in and do it too. Well, on a lighter note, we'll get into the intro to actually beekeeping. So some of the things for specifics for land are you need good drainage, you need fresh water, a lot of sunlight, and the hives should be south-facing. So as you can see here, we have our 3 hives, our yellow one, our purple one, and our white one. And actually in this photo, we were painting them. The reason we paint them is so that the bees can distinguish one hive from another. Bees are very intelligent in that aspect. They can, the Russian bees, we have Russian, feral, and Italian. The Russian ones will see the yellow one and know that is their hive. They will see the others and know not to go in it. When farmers have hundreds of hives, they will usually put small markers on top, like they kind of act as a QR code. You know, they look similar, but they're just colored instead of black and white. The bees will see that and recognize which is theirs. They can also recognize faces, which is pretty cool. So ours right now are on pallet boards. We want to put them on cinder blocks for the winter, just so we can fit more things underneath to avoid high moisture content. But they're located by the Policini Center, so they are at the community garden, situated right on a hill. They're facing south. It's a more remote part of campus, but also an environmental part of campus, so it kind of fits together, and it works really nicely. A lot of you are probably interested in the cost and equipment, and the initial cost is pretty expensive, but after that, your maintenance cost is $5 a month or something. You don't even have to spend $5 a month. So if you were to get a single hive, you would need a nuke, or a bee colony, excuse me. And those you can buy for $150. If you happen to get lucky and find one, that's great, saves you $150 bucks. But it's usually best to go buy one because you know, you can trust the seller. That is their job, is to produce healthy bees. So it's just more preferred in the bee community. The bee hive itself, you would need a complete brood box. That includes the bottom board, top cover, inner cover, outer cover, 10 frames, and 1 deep hive body. An additional deep hive box, which you should get, is $60. Honey supers are $50, and then a 5-pack of frames are $25. The frames aren't necessary, but it usually is a good idea to get them. Just that way, when you're switching out frames, like if you are taking out honey, put in these extra frames that they can fill up. That way there's not just a gap. For accessories, you would want a queen excluder, especially after your first year, a bee brush, a veil, suit, and gloves, all of which you can get for $60, and then a hive tool and smoker. The smoker, hive tool, and the whole suit, those are, I would say, completely required. The smoker, definitely. the bee brush and queen excluder you don't really need. I'm at the point where I no longer use a bee suit. I can recognize a lot of the healthy bee behavior, so I don't go in with anything. I just go in with clothing that I know they're not going to attack. So if you were to buy a single hive, just the box, that is $405. On top of that, you would probably spend $120 on accessories and $150 on the bees themselves. So you're looking at, you know, probably $750 for a single hive. But after that, if your hive survives the winter, you know, then you're done. Maintenance is really just, you could do a sugar shake or an alcohol shake. That's so easy. That's literally $5 a month. All of these you can purchase at CountryMax, which is really nice, well, except for the bees. So if you happen to live in Rochester, a CountryMax just opened up a mile from my house, which was very convenient for me. I can go there anytime and get what I need. You can purchase it online through like Dadant, D-A-D-A-N-T. There's a lot of companies where you can buy it from. It just, you know, needs to ship, and shipping is expensive for a 50-pound box. So for maintenance, we don't really trim the area around it. RIT Grounds mows the hill, but then the immediate area around the hive, we just let the natural flora go. But for inspecting the hive, you should do a powdered sugar shake or an alcohol wash. I have 2 videos here that you can see, or a video and an article, on how to do them. So when you get sent this presentation, you can look at that. But basically, you just take around 300 bees, usually a half cup, and you just shake them and see how many Varroa mites are falling off. Then you can test some of the bees and things like that to find out more of the health of the hive and how they're doing. As you can see in this photo, there's the Policini Center and there's Eastman. So they're pretty close to all the buildings, and yes, still remote, which is really nice. Oh, that's my last slide. I didn't know that.
Okay.
Okay, so.
I don't know about anybody else, but I had no idea there was that much involved in bees. So
and that was scratching the surface.
And that was, and Austin says that's scratching the surface. So we do have some time for questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box. We have one question to start, and that is, you talked about the community garden and that you planted some plants in your own plot in the community garden. Are there types of plants that you should plant that are very bee-friendly and help them to be more healthy?
Yeah, so there are lots of specifics that we like here on campus for pollinators. We call them pollinator-friendly plants. They're usually things that they just bloom more, you know, they're all flowering, things like that. But there's a huge variety. If you are looking for crops, you can get flowering fruits and vegetables and use those, you know. So things like raspberries, apple trees, we had the flowering tomatoes, potatoes, squash. Anything that develops a flower is good. But some of the things that I like best personally are herbs. We just happen to use a lot. We make a lot of products. If you saw but the poster for our club sale, we made a lot of products for that were all natural and organic. So we used bits of lavender, calendula, which are just daisies, you know, all these different chamomile, things like that. So we try to grow those because not only is it better for those bees, but also we can take that product in the end, and we can use the lavender in our products. So we're designing some pollinator gardens right now, and we're looking at having lavender, thyme, rosemary. We're staying away from mint because that runs really rampant and can choke out a garden instantly. Bee balm, all of which, those are probably the top 4 pollinator herbs. But for flowers, there's delphinium, hollyhock, snapdragons, foxglove. I don't know if I would recommend that, though, just because it is a poisonous plant, so you can't, I don't know. I don't know if the honey made from foxglove is also poisonous. I know if you have lily of the valley, honey made from that is poisonous. But I know that if you just have a wild pollinator garden and you're not collecting honey, foxglove is one of the best. And it's also my favorite plant. But tall plant, you want a variety, really. So things that aren't just going to bloom 1 month and then the rest of the year everything's dead. You know, plant them in order. So what I did wrong was I planted everything that bloomed in 1 month, then it died. I planted more things, and then we had a drought, so everything stayed dead. whereas you want to, kind of go with the seasons. So one of the biggest things is clover in the spring, and then goldenrod as it gets to late summer and fall. Those are the two, probably the biggest things for pollination in commercial honey. So if you ever heard of clover honey or goldenrod honey, that's why. It's because they grow everywhere, they produce a lot of pollen, and bees love them. Butterfly bushes are really good, especially if you want to increase butterflies on campus. What do we have? We have sunflowers, wild lavender. Those are probably our two biggest. But then we have some flowering trees as well. So there's a lot of landscaping, pollinator-friendly landscaping you can do. And, you can just look it up. It's pretty simple, but I would suggest flowering herbs. Those are my favorite because they also smell great. So.
Okay, we've got another question. How problematic is temperature for hive success?
So for temperature, success, it's kind of hard to say. So for us, we have the 3 hives. We have Russian bees, feral, and Italian. The feral bees, they're from around here. They're doing fine. The Italian bees are not doing well because they are used to a much warmer climate and more sun. So they also had a weak queen. But so they really took a long time just to get settled. Our Russian hive, those Russian bees are just more acclimated to some colder weather. So here they are thriving. They filled their hive within a month and a half, or yeah, just about a month. They filled 2 boxes, which was really, really incredible and beyond belief. So in terms of their success, temperature relates to the type of bee they are. When it comes to survivability in the winter, it's not necessarily the temperature that kills them, it's the moisture content. That is why ventilation is such an important aspect of having the hive. The bees will self-regulate. If they need to stay warm, they will all clump together. They don't hibernate in the winter like other bees or wasps. They instead, they are just dormant. They don't leave the hive, but they basically just wiggle to stay warm. So they will regulate their own temperature, and they will heat up areas of the hive that have higher moisture content to try to evaporate it. But if it isn't ventilated, that moisture has nowhere to go. So then the temperature, dips pretty low, which it does frequently here in Rochester. And then that moisture that can't get out freezes, that can kill the bees or allow bacteria to grow. And so it's not so much just temperature, it's more of regulating their moisture content that is more or less problematic for their success.
Okay, and so following up with that, then when you look at the heat of summer, and you mentioned the drought that we've had up here in the Northeast, is that also, is it a heat issue, or is it that there's so little moisture in the air?
Yeah, at that point it's the least moisture, and also because that drought then affected how many plants were growing. So the temperature didn't affect how well they were doing, or the increase in temperature, excuse me. It was really what that meant for the other plants. So when the plants weren't growing, these bees weren't getting pollen. They weren't getting pollen, so they weren't making any honey. They didn't have anything to make bee bread or to feed the baby bees, so they were dying a lot faster. They couldn't get new sources of protein and other, I don't know, antibodies. What is it called when we're out in the elements so that we get less sick?
Vitamin D?
No, not necessarily that, but just more things to prevent us from getting sick. They're exposed to more when there's more pollen, because they go out and they're out in the environment more. So when we had the drought, they weren't doing that.
Okay. How long and how many bees would it take to produce certain quantities of honey, pollen, and other products?
That usually depends on how many bees you have and how long you've had the bees. So our first year, we have not collected any honey from the bees, from our actual hives, because, I know how cold the winter gets here, and so I want to make sure they have the best chance for survival. So we haven't collected any. However, I know our hives have produced about 20 pounds extra of honey that I feasibly could take. So within the first year, you typically get 5 to 10 pounds per hive. After that, you get 10 to 20. And then when you get into your third year of a healthy hive, you can get 30 to 60 pounds, sometimes a summer, sometimes a month, which is, if you don't know what 60 pounds of honey is, it is a 5-gallon bucket. And I know this because we put it in. So 60 pounds is a 5-gallon bucket per hive, which is a lot. And with that, you can also get pounds and pounds of comb. You don't really collect the pollen. Some people do, and they sell it. I don't see the point in that. That's their food.
Question from somebody who sounds like they know what they're doing. Do you vary the entrance opening size on your hives?
You should, yes. I made the mistake. Like I said, when I started, I didn't really know too much. I just kind of went with the flow. I put the entrance reducers on the front of our hives so that they wouldn't swarm. They were less likely to swarm and leave the hive. However, then they propolised in the entrance reducers, so I cannot get them out. They're stuck at the bottom under 2 or 3 boxes of heavy honey, comb, and brood. So unfortunately, I reduced them, and I now cannot get them open. Additionally, our white hive, which is the Italian bees, their bottom board was it was put on upside down, and so they have 2 open entrances, but they're both reduced. What's best is after you put the colony in the box, you have the entrance reducer on for like a week or 2, and then when they've established themselves, then you take it off, and that increases ventilation and airflow. They come and go as they please, and that makes a huge difference. So that is something that I will definitely do after winter.
Okay. Well, we're winding down. If anyone does have another question, please feel free to type it in the chat box in the next minute or 2. I will also mention that if you are in the area of the main campus in Rochester, the Beekeepers Club is having a pre-holiday sale, yes, right? The date is yet to be nailed down, but probably sometime in that 2nd or 3rd week of December. So if you're looking for all natural products.
Yeah, we usually sell bottles of honey, so it's all local and organic. This year we expanded our product line. So we used to just do some baked goods, honey, and then what else? What did I say? Sugar scrubs. Now we do sugar scrubs, lip balm, candles, lotion, and body butter, as well as soap. So everything we make is organic. All the colors used are organic. We use like beet powder, spinach powder, which sounds kind of weird, but it actually creates a really cool color. Turmeric powder, things like that. So I really like it. Also, our packaging is really fun.
And they have the best T-shirt on campus,
yes,
guaranteed. You saw Austin in his T-shirt in the video. So a couple last quick questions here.
Beta Sigma Sigma.
There we go. Yes, the bee club, the bee fraternity. Do you recommend either type of bees to get started in beekeeping, and what is the best time to start a new hive? So let's take a look at those.
I really like our Russian bees. I find that they are a little calmer, which is nice. They're harder to agitate. They also do well up here in Rochester. Rudy, I think you said you were in Lima right now, so you would probably want the Italian because it's warmer. I think it would be too hot for the Russian bees. As far as best time, you cannot go into the hive if it's above 50 degrees. Sorry, I messed that up. You can't go into the hive if it's under 50 degrees. So here in Rochester, that really limits us to mid-April to mid-October. So usually you want to do it a week after the last frost. That way, if it's a weak colony, they will survive that. So a week after the last frost, and when the temperature average stays above 50. A lot of places that's mid to late April. We got started with ours late because we didn't get permission to have the hives until like May 18th. So I told everyone at RIT, like I told all of the administrators, it's like our bees are coming in 3 days. Like I need to have permission because I can't stop it. But so late April is usually a good time to start it.
Okay. And our last question, what is the specific use of the smoke in calming bees?
So there's 2 questions you can ask with this, and I just think this is funny. Randy Oliver talked about this. He once asked the question, why do we smoke bees? And one of the beekeepers gave him this very long-winded 5 to 10-minute explanation about what the smoke does, and at the end, Randy was like, no, we smoke the bees so that they don't sting us. So we smoke them so that they don't sting us. But what the smoke does is a completely different question. the smoke, it inhibits their pheromones so that they aren't sending pheromones to every other bee in the colony, where you can have 10,000 to 60,000 bees saying, hey, there's a threat right here, get in attack mode, and everyone leave the hive and attack. You might have one bee that's angry at you, but that's fine, that's just one bee, and they usually get over it pretty quick. So the smoke, it inhibits their pheromones. It also makes them think that there is like a forest fire or some danger to the hive that is not necessarily human or animal. So when you think of like bees throughout history, forest fires have been, a common problem throughout history. So, and since bees normally live in trees, forest fires are basically their biggest enemy in nature. So the smoke makes them have that response as if their hive is going to be destroyed in a forest fire. They need to pack everything and leave. What they do is they gorge themselves on honey. That calms them, but then they're also just ready to save and protect the queen, not defend the hive. So it's kind of twofold. They go in, you can literally just watch all of the bees immediately run into the hive, gather as much honey as they can, and just wait. And then it also stops them from telling everyone else to attack. So it's nice and twofold, and there's a huge difference. The day I was stung in the leg, we were fully suited, but we didn't go in with any smoke. And I didn't realize it at the time, but my suit was getting stung like hundreds of times, and I didn't even realize it. Thankfully, I only got stung once, because that would have been very bad. I have developed an allergy to bees, which is very sad and ironic.
Wow.
Yeah, the first time I was stung was right in the face. Nothing happened, didn't swell at all.
Oh.
Then when I was in Ithaca, a bee accidentally stung me in the leg. I turned around and it flew into me and got caught in my shorts. I couldn't walk. My entire leg was swollen. And then, I've gotten stung in the arm and my whole arm is swelled up. So thankfully, I don't get stung anymore because I definitely am developing an allergy to it, which is not fun.
Oh, my. Okay, so that is all the time we have. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email them to ritalum@rit.edu, or you can tweet them to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we will direct your questions to Austin. All participants will receive an email from us in the next few days. There will be two things. There will be a link to today's webinar recording. There will also be a link to Austin's actual PowerPoint, which has a number of video links and article links in it that you can explore on your own. Many thanks again to Austin for being our speaker today, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for today's webinar. Keep an eye out for an email about our next webinar, which will be on Wednesday, December 7th. We invite you to join us for Better Photos. It's simple. This is a webinar featuring alumnus Ken Huth, a public relations photographer with 25 years of experience working in higher ed, medical and technical, and theater. He will share tips and tricks on how you can better understand your camera to improve your photography. Specifically, Ken will cover the 4 settings you really need on your camera so you can relax and ignore all those other buttons. He'll also discuss ways you can take photos that stand out by using your iPhone or another camera. And with the holidays approaching, you'll also gain some simple tips to help pick out the right camera and how you can save hundreds of dollars on your next camera purchase. Thanks again to everyone for joining us.